So welcome to today's technology briefing. We've come to expect a rhythm with GAFA. That's Google, Apple, Facebook, and Amazon. There's new hardware in the fall and software in the spring. We're excited today to dig into these technologies, thinking about what they're doing that affects the work that we are all working on across marketing and engagement, and just generally creating brilliant customer experiences. I'm honored today to have a team of experts. We've got Jared, an engineering manager here at Braze, and our expert on Google. Nico, a solutions consultant and our expert on Apple. Todd, the managing editor of our insights and communications team, as our expert on Facebook. And we have Rachel, a strategic business consultant, as our expert on Amazon. We've seen major themes with GAFA this year. And I think when we think about the importance of these technologies and what these companies are doing to shape our industry, it's important for us to pull out what these bigger ripple effects are and to have that 30,000-foot view. We're seeing across these behemoths a battle of hardware. So thinking of historically software companies moving into the hardware space or vice versa. Just last week, Facebook launched Portal and Portal Plus. So we're seeing this really interesting merge of hardware and software that's creating these really unique platforms and customer experiences. And then all of this is being fueled by a heavy investment in consumer AI. So thinking about how conversational interfaces, how we're teeing up recommendations for customers. These are all really important for the ways that we engage with consumers and the ways that consumers and ourselves are looking towards the technologies that we're using every day and kind of leveling up our expectations there. And then finally, we're not going to dig into this too deeply in today's webinar, but there is a regulatory pressure, I think, both in the United States and more globally that we're seeing. With the launch of GDPR in May, the EU's getting a lot of the headlines on this, or has gotten a lot of the headlines this year, but we're seeing this also be happening globally with California's Privacy Act, as well as different court interpretations from the EU. For instance, in France, the Google's lawsuit around whether or not those search results apply just within the EU or globally. And finally, we're doing this all with a lens to really understand how we can create these brilliant customer experiences. As we mentioned a little earlier, these companies are really setting the bar on what consumers are expecting and the ways that the hardware and the software that they're engaging with are delivering them value, and essentially what these brands are really enabling, both for their own customers, but then also for the ecosystem that they create for other brands. So with that, I'm really excited to bring on Jared. He's been an engineering manager here for a number of years and following Android and Google here for us. And so, Jared, I know that as you've been doing all of this work and specifically working with the Android SDK, what have you noticed are big bets that Google is making on Android?
Hey, Jenna, it's good to be here. I want to say that I think we are beginning the second kind of large paradigm shift on Android in recent memory. And to kind of set the stage for that, I want to talk about the first big shift. And so kind of pretend for a moment that you're in the year 2015. I think this was actually a deceptively long time ago. The iPhone 6 and Nexus 6 were the reigning flagships. And the iPhone 6s and Nexus 5X were being launched. And at that time, Android was a very developer-focused OS with extreme freedom for the developers in terms of what they wanted to do in their apps. So developers could, run arbitrarily in the background. They could get permissions upon download to do basically whatever they wanted and have a carte blanche there. And there was no notification categorization. So if you wanted a certain type of notification, then you had to get all of them basically. And in that environment, iOS was really far ahead of Android in terms of being a legitimate, like, user-focused, consumer-focused OS, and an OS that's focused on the end customer experience. And so 2015 to 2017 was basically about catching up in that area. So reining in those apps, providing granular control over your own experience. You know, in Android M, we had permission opt-in. So finally, you could say, hey, I actually don't want you to use my camera, rather than saying, oh, if I want to use this app at all, I have to let it use my camera. In 2017, Android added notification channels, which allowed you to, you know, choose which types of notifications you'd like to see, as well as background limitations and foreground services, which basically made it a lot more transparent when an app was running in the background and doing things kind of, you know, without your knowledge. And so that was the first shift, which was really a parity play with iOS. And now I think we're in the middle of a second shift where Google is actually trying to take Android ahead of iOS by focusing on AI and intelligent OS. And I think what we're going to see more and more is features that kind of focus on anticipating user needs and contextual awareness, and the phone kind of understanding what's going on, you know, what time of day it is, what the user's doing. In 2017, Google I/O, Sundar Pichai basically said, hey, we're moving from mobile first to AI first. And I think Android Pie is the real first, you know, kind of fruition of that effort.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So with that latest release, how are they extending the narrative of user control and accelerating that focus on AI?
So in particular on AI, I think you could consider Android P to be the first AI-focused release. So AI intelligence features are kind of at the forefront. I think that, you know, there's a ton of examples to kind of go through. There's adaptive battery, where battery is optimized at the app level, kind of based on usage and anticipated usage. And the word anticipated there is kind of key, because, you know, that refers to the intelligence portion of this. You have face down do not disturb detection. So if you put your phone, you know, with its face down on a flat surface, the phone will be like, hey, you must be eating dinner or something, so I'm gonna just chill out and leave you alone. You've got notification suggestions, which are prompts to kind of block notifications if the app or if the OS notices that you're not really interacting with them. You know, this kind of underscores the importance of sending users content that is truly important to them, because more and more the OS is going to be able to understand this content is actually not relevant for the user, and the OS will do its best to suppress all that kind of stuff. And then lastly, app actions, which are also kind of interesting, which are little portions of an app, like little pieces of code or functionality that can be in your launcher and that are presented at relevant times. So maybe you pop into your car and then, you know, Spotify comes out or Maps comes out, and that relevance and ranking is all determined by machine learning as well.
Yeah, and they're really investing in promoting AI, not just in Android, but across the product portfolio. Is there anything we should watch out for or learn?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that Google is committing to a couple of things here. Basically, they're committing to hardware. They're saying, hey, we're a software company, but we also build hardware. They're committing to an ecosystem strategy, which is to say we have a lot of pieces of hardware that talk to each other and that are greater than the sum of their parts. And they're committing to the mass market, which is to say they don't want to be like, you know, selling Nexus phones to a couple of nerds here and there. Like, they want to sell Pixels to everybody. And I think that you really saw the first kind of big volley last year in the hardware event. Pixel 2, you know, Pixel 2 XL came out, which was expected, you know, the continuation of the Pixel line, but also Home Mini, Home Max, the new Pixel Book, which is like a really fancy Chromebook, the Pixel Buds, which only work with the Pixel, the Daydream View, and so on and so forth. And then a few days ago in 2018, we kind of saw the continuation of the trend. We had a couple of new interesting devices like the Pixel Slate, which is the iPad competitor, the Pixel Stand, Home Hub, and so on and so forth. And so Google is really, you know, I think that they're committed to this, and I think that what they're hoping is that all of these different devices are actually just going to be entryways into the larger Google ecosystem. They're going to be interfaces. So Maps is an interface, Photos is an interface, Gmail is an interface, these various apps, and then the devices themselves, and they're all kind of glued together with Assistant and AI. And as a result, you know, similar to what we see with iOS, but even at a potentially greater level due to Google's kind of dominance in AI, you see this ecosystem that's much greater than the sum of its parts.
Great, thanks, Jared. So I think the big takeaway, I think that you mentioned is that move from mobile first to AI first. And so up next, we're thinking about Apple and what Apple is doing to kind of extend their own AI narrative, but mostly really digging in on the new software that they've released with iOS 12 that went live in September. And we've got Nico Berliner here. He's a solutions consultant with us and our resident Apple expert. Nico, can you tell us a little bit about iOS 12 and any notable changes?
Hey, Jenna. Yeah, thanks for being here. I think the big theme of the iOS 12 release was a focus on digital well-being. So actually similar to what Google also previously did is I think Apple came to the conclusion that there are users, and that includes myself as well, that have some unhealthy habits with their phones and spend just way too much time on certain apps. And they have introduced features like screen time, like do not disturb modes that allow users to dial down on that. And I think there's a similar notion when it comes to the design changes they have made to notifications as well. And this is really twofold. On one side, they have introduced changes like group notification that focus on trying to declutter that user experience and that UI when you check that notification center or look at the lock screen. And on the other side, it's also about disturbing the user less and recognizing that notifications disrupt users in their daily life, and this is something that brands only should have permission to use to drive value with the user and for the user. And then finally, Apple has also made some big changes to permissions that we as marketers need to be aware of. And first of all, there has been this introduction of allowing users to unsubscribe directly from a notification with basically a single click. So what will probably happen is that brands that send unrelevant or poorly timed notification get penalized for that more directly by users. And then on the other side, they also introduced a new concept of provisional authorized pushes, which I think could be also a game changer here.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about provisional authorization and really thinking about how brands are going to deploy and use that?
Yeah, absolutely. So provisional authorization is meant to be an alternative way for brands to ask for that push permission. So previously and historically, Apple had these in-app prompts that ask the user to allow notifications, and those aren't going away, those still exist. But Apple has introduced provisional auth, so notifications that can be sent even before the user has fully opted in for push. Brands can already start sending pushes, but these will only go to the notification center quietly and won't play any sound, won't be in the lock screen. And by leveraging this, brands can ask users for permission directly from the lock screen, and Apple will add this little note to the push that says, do you want to receive more notifications like this from the brand? And if the user clicks yes on that, they are essentially opted in as well. And I think what brands will do is they use these two alternative methods in conjunction and complementary. So with that in-app prompt, that's probably still the best and most effective way to ask for permission. So brands can be really be patient when they're going to show that and when they do that one-time push for that. So waiting for that big milestone in a user journey to ask that in-app prompt, being comfortable in the knowledge that those users who may never reach that point can still be reached with that alternative method with a provisional auth push. And I think this is a really big opportunity that iOS 12 is offering there for marketers to jump on that, because it could mean that marketers can increase their reach with push by driving up those push enablement rates for their users.
Yeah, that's really interesting as we talk about driving up just eyeballs and subscriptions. I know that Google and now Apple are using AI to recommend unsubscriptions. And it's going to be harder to get our messages in front of different audiences. What do you think brands should do?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's pretty simple. This whole idea that message experiences should be brilliant is getting more important than ever, right? So because users have quicker and easier ways to log out, to opt out, and even get suggestions from AI to do so, brands must make sure that they leverage all the capabilities they have to send those relevant messages. And one thing there is really taking advantage of those platform updates and changes. So with group notifications, marketers actually do have the control how they group them together in the Braze dashboard. They can send action buttons, rich notifications that allow users to interact with it on a high level. And then ultimately just making sure that every single push and every single touch point has relevance in terms of timing, personalization, but also the cadence of the messages. So users feel the value of that and don't feel the urge to opt out.
Yeah, so I think one of the big takeaways that we can take from Apple is similar to like an Apple Store experience, where it's a very smooth interaction, really thinking about that user-centric design. And I think that's really exciting given the way technology is going and the way that we can really think about both that hardware blending with those types of customizations and really nuanced customer experiences. So thanks, Nico.
Thank you.
Great. So next up, we have Facebook. It's my pleasure to have my colleague Todd. He's the managing editor of the Insights and Communications team and the man behind Braze Magazine and some of our great, rich content. Welcome, Todd.
Thanks, Jenna. Glad to be here.
Great. So first off, with Facebook, I want to talk about just in general, they are growing. I think social media is growing at a similar rate to just general internet penetration. But as we think about where they are and what's happening, how do we think that they're going to keep engaging and attracting customers?
Well, Jenna, I think basically Facebook in particular is sort of at an interesting moment in its history, both because it's bigger and more influential than ever, but it's also, frankly, dealing with more controversy and kind of significant trust issues. And I think the kind of key things that they're going to have to do are deal with that trust issue, but also find ways to take the experience they're providing and make it richer and kind of feel novel for people who are very used to just engaging with Facebook in basic ways. On the trust issue, I think probably everyone's pretty up to date on where things stand with that between the 2016 election, the rise of sort of fake news as a point of controversy, the Cambridge Analytica scandal, and that recent data breach a few weeks ago that has compromised tens of millions of Facebook accounts. It's all a pretty bad publicity issue for Facebook, but it also has practical effects because people's trust in the platform can impact their willingness to share things, which is the whole purpose of Facebook and a lot of its properties. And we're seeing Facebook taking a serious attempt to respond to this. At F8 this year, this spring, we saw them announce the ability to clear your Facebook history, so all the data that's been collected on you over the years or decades that you've been using it. You can now actually go through and kind of remove, which is unprecedented. We're also seeing a lot of efforts to use technology to make the experience kind of better in terms of those sort of issues. They're using AI now to try to identify hate speech on their platforms in a quicker way. They've added post footers for questionable content regarding fake news. So if you have a friend who keeps posting about how the Lincoln assassination was faked, they'll now have a little footer on the bottom linking you to an actual article about maybe that's not the case. And then also there is some evidence that these various efforts are having an impact. There was a recent study by NYU and Stanford that found that since the 2016 election, there's been a 60% drop in the number of interactions with known fake news sites from Facebook. In contrast, Twitter's levels have stayed about the same. So there is some evidence this is happening. On the sort of positive side, what we're seeing is Facebook trying to double down on providing new rich experiences that take advantage of its existing kind of massive scale. We're seeing this with Facebook's dating functionality, which they announced at F8 this year, and they're testing out in Colombia. Remains to be seen what the impact will be, but it does potentially give users a new reason to engage more frequently with the Facebook platform, despite being a mature platform. So that's something that is worth watching. We're also seeing across the Facebook ecosystem a significant push on trying to find new ways to get people to engage with the content and people who are on there. On Instagram, they announced a new Explore button that basically uses AI to nudge Instagram users outside of their comfort zone and helps highlight some of the wealth of user-generated content that's on Instagram that isn't just being created by your particular friends. There's also been a move towards kind of more advanced functionalities. There's been increased support announced this year at F8 around making it easier for developers and brands to take advantage of chatbots and augmented reality in the things that they're building for Messenger in particular. So we're seeing a lot of these initiatives coming out. I think it's still a little early to know what their impact will be.
Yeah, and on that messaging app front, I know that Facebook's been pretty dominant in this area with their acquisition of WhatsApp in 2014 and this continued investment in Messenger. How are we seeing these applications evolve?
Well, I think the big thing is that we're seeing Facebook. I think there's evidence that Facebook thinks that these messaging experiences may well be the future of their business, and they're really doubling down on investment in these particular areas, in some ways even more so than their kind of flagship Facebook experience. At F8, we saw them roll out video chat across basically all of their properties, including group video chat. They've been adding all sorts of new integrations, one of the big ones being the ability to share content, so music or videos, things like that, more easily in their your stories on Instagram and Facebook. So, if you're doing your Instagram story and you want to, share a song from Spotify that's like your song of the day or something along those lines, it's very easy now with a couple of clicks to just do that and kind of bring all those outside experiences into the Facebook ecosystem. I think that's also, there's some, thought among, experts that Facebook is preparing for a world after the newsfeed, where these sort of stories are much more central to how we experience social media. And I think this is an interesting kind of potential piece of evidence for that. The other big thing that we're seeing, I think that because of the messaging nature of these platforms, is a real move into a more serious investment for business messaging. Back in 2016, we saw Facebook announce both chatbots, which got a lot of hype, but also kind of direct business messaging. And that's made it possible for brands to actually directly interact with customers on Facebook and its properties, as opposed to just having a page that people can like. And I think that's starting to become more a serious investment for them. Last year, we saw WhatsApp pilot a similar program as far as business messaging with small businesses, and they announced this year they're going to expand it out to basically all businesses. So that's a big thing to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and what does this mean for businesses?
I think basically it's a big new opportunity. Business messaging on these platforms, it can be hard to kind of keep in your head just how much of the world these platforms reach. Both Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp have audiences over 1 billion people. And WhatsApp in particular has, there are large parts of the world where it's the main way that people digitally interact with their friends. And so it basically is an opportunity for brands to reach people they might not have been able to reach effectively, to build relationships that may have been impossible before this. That being said, I think it's important, if you're going to invest in this area, to think a lot about the restrictions and kind of areas to be careful of. In general, Facebook has taken an approach where the messaging that they allow has to be kind of responsive. So you can only message a user if they say like your page, or they reach out to you first, via message with a chatbot or something like that, seemingly as an attempt to reduce spam. I think the other key thing to keep in mind is that the idea of companies sending you messages through these messaging platforms is basically new. I think for a lot of people, it can be a little jarring if they're used to only getting messages from their mom or their friend or their significant other. And basically, it's something where we don't have real social norms yet around what's appropriate, what's creepy, what's appealing. And brands that move into this space now are going to have an advantage, but they're also going to have to tread very carefully because some of the rules of the game are not really set down. The other thing I think I would say is just that with chatbots and with these sort of messenger-like experiences that brands can take advantage of, there is some suggestion that this is part of a larger move towards more conversational marketing approaches. You see the same thing with things like Alexa or Google Home, where it's not just about a brand taking its promo message and sending it along and kind of pushing out whatever it's trying to communicate. It's largely about a conversation between customers trying to achieve something or get information and brands who want to kind of follow up and kind of build that relationship with a back and forth, which I think has a lot of potential, but we're still sort of seeing how that can play out. And actually, speaking on that, I remember, Jenna, you were mentioning earlier that you'd seen kind of an interesting example of this with Facebook Messenger. I think it was the Golden State Warriors chatbot.
Yeah. So we're heading into basketball season, and I'm not religious about my watching the games. And if anybody else is a fan, highly recommend subscribing, because what they'll do is they'll send you or send you messages during games with score updates. So if you're out and about or just don't have the ability to be watching, you can kind of keep up to date on the scores, and then you also get some recaps after the game to just know who won, what were the big headlines in it. So it's really helped me kind of feel connected to the big team in town.
Yeah, definitely a really interesting sort of evolution.
Yeah. Okay, so great. I think that covers all of our questions for Facebook today, but I think that there's probably a lot more we can kind of dive into. I think the major takeaway though right now is just this move towards conversational marketing and really thinking about understanding your customers, where they are, and kind of asking them both implicitly and explicitly what that engagement should look like. So that listening as well as talking in that conversation. So thanks, Todd, so much. Up next, we have Rachel. Rachel is the Director of Strategic Business Consulting here at Braze. Her background is deeply seeped with retail, working with companies like Shopbot and Whole Foods, as well as Sephora and PetSmart. She's kind of understands retail inside and out, and I'm really excited to have her here. Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks, Jenna. Super excited to be here.
Yeah, and I'm also really excited to be talking about Amazon. I really love their kind of guerrilla marketing tactics, where they tend to also make announcements in the fall these days, but they always are kind of timing them against their competition. And this year, they announced a lot actually of hardware changes the same week that the iPhone shipped. Can you recap for us what those announcements were?
Absolutely, and you're absolutely making a bit of an understatement when you said some announcements. They made over 70. I think it was almost humorous, and journalists thought, when were they going to end? But there were several updates they made, mostly related to the Alexa ecosystem. And it became very clear, and continues to be clear, that Amazon's super bullish on this smart home category. So there were a lot of updates announced to the existing, Alexa devices that we know, like the Echo. But on top of that, new ones were announced, like a microwave, for instance, with Dash integrated. So now, instead of going on your computer to order popcorn if you've run out, you can actually order directly through, Amazon's proprietary microwave. They also launched something like a wall clock, for instance, so that you can voice control a timer when you're cooking. So these were just a couple of the other, new entrances of Alexa, enabled hardware. And super excited to see where they go from here, and as they expand to more parts of this physical cloud and other parts of the home.
Yeah, it's really interesting that they're making and expanding this Alexa usage. I definitely think that that's been a commercial success for them, but it still sometimes feels like across the Echo devices that they're fancy speakers and timers. How are they expanding these use cases?
Yeah, that's a great question, and super timely, based on just the announcements that we just saw a couple weeks ago. But it's very clear right now that Amazon is focusing on mobility versus mobile, and really finding and identifying more of those hands-free moments, like, driving, for instance, to expand to. So they also announced the launch of Echo Auto, and that's just a really good example of how they're growing, this idea of this physical cloud outside of the home. And again, beyond speakers, really what other facets of someone's life can Alexa be, touch and be a part of. And this really, an important thing to note here is how this opens up the door for Amazon to collect more first-party data. And that's super important for Amazon to really, especially in the age of GDPR, to maintain market share and, a lot of the core differentiators they have. But, historically speaking, a lot of what we see in terms of when we log into Amazon are recommendations based on our purchase history. But with the expansion of things like Echo Auto, now Amazon's going to have the ability to really understand other things like consumers' routines and location-based behaviors, like when are they coming and going from work? What gas stations are they going to, and how often are they going out to eat? Things that, in the offline world that are happening all the time that Amazon really has not much insight to today, but of course it's expanding with their acquisitions of, and, foray into things like food delivery, et cetera. But, really where we see even more proof that first-party data is a priority for Amazon is just actually earlier this week, we saw that they filed a patent for technology that's going to enable Alexa to analyze actually voices for signs of illness and behavioral health. And that could also, of course, be two huge factors that help them provide more relevant recommendations to consumers. And really, Amazon's not the only retailer, and retail brand that we're seeing focus on first-party data outside of just simple transactions. It's really not unique to them. We also saw that Walmart also filed a patent for a smart shopping cart that has a handle that actually records biometric data like heart rate, speed, temperature, et cetera. And that's really giving and could give Walmart a huge insight into what's been a blind spot for retailers in general, which is offline shopping behavior, and really peek inside to what browsing looks like in the brick and mortar world. So huge, big developments, but first party data is definitely a theme that we're seeing, behind a lot of these growth strategies when it comes to Alexa and outside of the home expansion.
Yeah, and I think when we think about customer experiences, that's great. Like that first party data can be something that we can take away. I know that Amazon's also teaching us in other areas. We've often seen them as shaking up retail. And with retail, we've got the holiday season nearly upon us. Is there anything that we should watch out for with these guys?
Yeah, actually holidays are, Amazon probably, gets 50% of their press during the holiday season. If I were to bet, it's a really popular time for obviously big e-commerce predictions to be made. And it's no surprise that analysts are saying that they expect Amazon to capture at least what they did last year, which was 89% of all online holiday shopping spend amongst like the big dominant retailers like Target and like Walmart. And of course, where customers go, retail brands must follow. So we're also seeing a huge shift in, ad spend. And right now, we're seeing upwards of 60% of search budgets going from Google to Amazon amongst retail brands. So that's the proof is there that, of course, Amazon has the eyeballs and the consumers, and that brands need to follow suit. And another, key area here is that, as of course Amazon maintains its, stake in owning really the core market for e-com, they're also really focusing on other areas of growth as well. And one big area is that portfolio of private label brands. So it's really interesting to see how Amazon and the rest of the retail industry is evolving. So for instance, a couple of weeks ago, Amazon launched the release of their new private label mattress line. And this comes at no surprise with brands like Lisa and Tomorrow and Casper, et cetera, growing. But it did come at the same time that Mattress Firm, which was the nation's largest mattress retailer, actually filed for bankruptcy. So it's super interesting to see, you know, the shifting trends and how Amazon is capitalizing on more direct to consumer and private label brands, and, you know, to kind of further proof of, you know, Amazon's focus in this area and that they're honing in on their private label strategy is that just a couple of days ago, they launched a partnership with Shark Tank, which doesn't sound like a huge deal, you know, and that the obvious, it's going to provide winners an easy way for them to sell to consumers. But the really more important thing that we need to look at and retail brands need to be aware of here is that it's giving Amazon more of a firsthand look at just how certain types of products and devices are resonating with consumers. So more of like a research and development angle, and how they're, you know, evaluating potential acquisition opportunities and really just looking for new areas for them to just broaden their private label business. So I think there's going to be a lot more to come from Amazon, you know, when it comes to the direct to consumer private label area. And I think it'll be interesting to see what happens these holidays.
That's awesome. And I think, you know, the big thing to kind of take away from this is that mobility over mobile, and really thinking from either from first party data or these private labels, giving consumers choice and allowing them either to work directly, but also look at the larger ecosystem of offerings, whether that's you know, in the actual experience itself or in the goods that you're buying. So thanks, Rachel, so much.
Absolutely.
Great. And so just to take it back to the entire GAFA takeaways, I think from Google, we really explored this shift from mobile first to AI first, and really thinking about how AI can power those experiences, thinking through how we moved from giving users control to almost predicting those behaviors and aiding the experiences and interactions that they have both within Google products, but also within their larger ecosystem. And then next, we, with Nico on Apple, discussed kind of creating smooth customer experiences, how with iOS 12 and the work that Apple is doing to really allow for a lot of customization within the platform. There's a really nuanced understanding of what consumers need, what they need for their own digital well-being, but also for what they need to get things done, and how the phone and also their larger ecosystem of devices are going to be powering that. Then with Todd, we discussed Facebook's approach to conversational marketing. So really thinking about how chat apps like WhatsApp and Messenger, but also thinking more broadly about chat in general when you start to think globally, like with Line and Kik and WeChat, just really how we create these responsive conversations, really taking into account users' behaviors and actions. And I think this is the area where we often talk about those implicit versus explicit ideas. What are customers asking for? Like, do they want more updates? Are they responding on a messenger to say, tell me the Golden Warriors score again? Or are you delivering that, the next game that automatically kind of gets served into their inbox? So again, breaking down those implicit versus explicit in the conversational. And then finally, with Rachel and Amazon, we talked about smart environments and this idea of mobility over mobile. With more than 70, I think, announcements of new hardware, I think Amazon's really digging into how they can expand those use cases of Alexa, move it from the home actually even to the car with Echo Auto. And I think it's going to be a really interesting and important platform for us to watch, especially because there is commercial adoption there. So with that, I want to encourage you all to go to braze.com/perspectives, subscribe to our magazine. We're constantly releasing expert guidance like you heard today, and we're really looking forward to kind of continuing the conversation. If you were adding questions throughout this, we'll be following up in email. If you do have questions, add them right into the GoToWebinar panel and we'll follow up as well. Thank you guys so much.